we're developing this big piece of software called FontLab VI, which is a commercial GUI font editor, and we want obviously to publish also user manuals or a user manual documentation that I decided that it should follow some principles. So first of all, it should be possible to extend continuously. So previously, or for our old apps that are kind of like 10 plus years old, we used Word, and there was one person who was compiling it, editing it. There was a single file. It was a tedious process, and it wasn't really updated regularly. So here, because we moved our development to GitHub into a private repository, that's where our source is hosted. I thought, okay, so let's also try to use GitHub for the content creation of the user manual. And this acronym CORDIDA, or well, ZBOWID, that's just a silly, it's not a product, the collaborative open source rapid digital internet documentation authoring is just a silly title. And the Polish one is funny because it's ZBOWID. Well, I'm not going to get into that. Primarily, yes, exactly. It would be too long. So the point is, I wanted multiple authors to be able to write and to put images into a system that is simple, that could be used both online for a couple of our colleagues in a team who just contribute infrequently, and also offline. And GitHub has the system, the wiki system, which is a super simple wiki. I think it's called Jekyll, that is basically a Git repository of a flat structure of files that are markdown files. It's possible, I think, to use other syntaxes, but I like markdown because I invented markdown. Well, not really, but I've been writing my emails in plain text since the 90s and adding little things like a hash for a heading and then asterisks around something that I wanted to emphasize. And at some point, I discovered that other people do the same, and then it's called markdown. So it was like, oh, okay, so I don't even have to learn it because I'm already doing it without knowing that I'm doing it. So it's super simple, and the nice thing about Markdown is basically the fact that it's very, okay, the links are sort of a bit weird. I never remember whether the first one should be square brackets and the second should be round, and whether the title should be first or the link should be first. So I get sometimes confused with this, but other than that, lots of the Markdown structure is very sort of straightforward. There are some simple notational extensions, and also Markdown is, so basically you can write pure prose, pure kind of plain text, and you can annotate it simply yourself, or you can have somebody else who annotates it, but it's very lightweight. So basically when my colleague writes something in pure prose and I annotate it a bit, and then he comes back to edit it, he is not confused with the new stuff that appeared, because it's quite minimalistic. So he will know that, okay, so even if he doesn't really remember these tiny things, they're very unobtrusive. Also, and this is sort of like a big topic that at some point maybe I'll try to address, is that all this Unicode and superb notation is actually very limited by the fact that we are using a physical keyboard to enter text. And anything that isn't very easily accessible on the keyboard, ideally printed on it, will not be entered by 99% of computer users. So with the mobile devices that have an on-screen keyboard, it's slightly better because it's more dynamic, but basically if you're writing, you really want to write to type in just the characters that you know how, and if you forget where was the slash or backslash, you can look it up on your physical keyboard. And that is sort of the bottleneck of...
White keyboards, maybe the dynamic too.
Yes, so but that's sort of, so right now we are kind of limited. This is the biggest limiting thing, I think, in sort of typography. The fact that, you know, smart quotes or whatever versus plain quotes, and they're ugly, but they're there, and they're sort of always there in the same layout on all computers. People memorized it, huge amounts of people memorized it and use it. And any other sort of, so Markdown only, as do programming languages very often, just use the ASCII plus those things like braces, brackets, asterisk, underline, because it's sort of there, so it became part of programming syntaxes, and also it became part of Markdown. So basically, you know, the annotational syntax is, it doesn't use any funny characters or any characters that would be complicated to enter for somebody, especially in a distributed environment where you basically sometimes use different tools, not necessarily your own computer that is specialized. So it's basically, Markdown can be sort of typed anywhere. And this anywhere typing, regardless of the environment, was an important thing for me because that's the way I work. You know, I sometimes type in, edit this stuff on my phone or on my iPad or on my computer or on somebody else's computer. So I chose Markdown, and also because it's just, oh, and the other aspect was there's lots of, as Vito already mentioned in his talk, there's lots of different implementations of Markdown, and I'm not necessarily limited by, well, I need to adhere to some standard, because it is still a kind of internal project. So all these different compilers for Markdown, it's actually always Markdown to HTML, because actually Markdown can, by design, include very explicit HTML. So basically anything that any HTML that you put inside of Markdown is also valid Markdown in a sense. It needs to be separated by blank spaces, but intermixing...
it's a good thing that Markdown is embedded. Markdown is Markdown.
Yes. So the other thing, so we have all these different compilers or processors, and they're written in all kinds of languages. So basically, depending on my needs, I can change the pipeline very, very easily. So I could now, you know, compile my stuff using the Python implementation of Markdown, but I could also plug in at some point later a JavaScript implementation that runs in the browser and that processes it live. So that's very widespread. Sometimes certain things don't work because it's an extensible format. So you can write extensions. Some of these compilers have a plugin infrastructure, and my favorite implementation, which is the Python one, has a plugin infrastructure that that allows people to write extensions, and there's lots of existing extensions. I've made this little website, a GitHub repo called Markdown Rundown, where I kind of list the popular extensions that I use, and also the syntax, you know, input, output HTML, and then, you know, what it looks like. And there's a number of that, and also I've sort of, you could say, in a way, commissioned an extension for rendering, for inputting and then rendering keyboard shortcuts. So in HTML, there is this notation, there is this tag KBD, which you can use and then style, and it's a semantic thing for, you know, to do whatever, press Control A. And because I'm writing a manual for software, for software, we have a lot of keyboard shortcuts. So, but of course, this notation, yes, I could input always the, you know, this explicit less than KBD, close it, then write CTRL, but that's silly. I don't want to do that because there's lots of that. So I wanted to have a shorthand for that. So I contacted the developer, Isaac Muse, who has a great package of existing extensions for Python Markdown. And I suggested to him, why don't we could together develop this extra extensions for keys, keyboard shortcuts. I came up with this notation, basically ++, and then I can separate the additional, if it's modifiers or a combination with pluses, so it sort of feels natural. So this is basically, this is what I enter in Markdown, and this is what gets output out, and then I can capture it and, well, apply some styling. And this is super handy, because then I can, I can teach my editors, my colleagues, to always, whenever they talk about, pressing shift or holding shift, that they basically write ++ shift ++. So, and I've written a couple of other extensions. I was also following the sort of literate programming paradigms and being fascinated by how it all works. And there are these massive packages, I think, R Markdown and also Iron Python, which is now called something else, that allow you to sort of interweave different texts and programming code that you can then execute and capture the results, and then have some text again and some code that gets executed. So basically a dynamic build-up of your document in kind of all languages. Well, but that software, both of these softwares are super heavy, super big and slow, and I didn't want that. I just wanted to have an ability to write some bits of Python inside my Markdown document and have that executed. So that was easy enough. That was something that I was able to write myself. I can't find it. Markdown steroids, yes. And that's a MD Macro. So basically, Macro is a templating engine that allows me to put, the idea is that you have some HTML and you have an inline notation that has some Python code, and then HTML goes again. But I actually thought, well, okay, so if it's good for HTML, it could also be good for Markdown. So basically, I just used this mechanism. I wrote this little extension. It's very simple. This is basically this is the entire extension. And what it does is, during the processing, yes, this is basically the extension. So effectively, this is a test file. So basically, here I can insert a bit of Python, capture a result. This always has to be a function, and then basically this function gets executed here, and I get the result. So it's super simple, and it sort of doesn't break my entire flow. So from this, I use two packages. I use the mkdocs, which is a sort of little a tool that allows you to take a collection of Markdown documents and produce a website for it. It's basically a static site generator. That's very popular. There's lots of packages that are static site generators. Effectively, people realized, okay, instead of having some Java or PHP on my server and building websites on the fly and having basically servers running all the time, we actually want to build them statically, put them on a server, and then have only the web server running. So it's much. So instead of doing things like WordPress, which is sort of heavy on the CPU, lots of people now make websites, even quite large websites, that are just generated as static HTML from some sources. And mkdocs is one such engine. So I've written a couple of more tools. One is, well, actually, I forked, because the great thing about GitHub, basically the way I work now, is I think of, well, I need some code that does something. For instance, what's on GitHub that does something with Markdown and is written in Python? So then GitHub has this advanced search thing. So I go to the advanced search, I say language Python, and then in the search box I say import Markdown, because that's very often the code that is used when you import the Markdown module, so you do something with it. And then I look at the search results and think, oh yeah, this looks interesting. So then I go there, it's open source, so I just grab the code, modify it, and then it works. I basically, this is like, I'm like a garbage collector, going to the trash, and he's like, oh yeah, look, this could be a radio, or this is half a radio, or this is half a washing machine, or maybe it's a washing machine that needs to be fixing. I put it on my truck, drive home, and build my stuff from it.
Washing machine with radio.
Hmm?
Washing machine with radio.
Yes, exactly. And in the end, I have my static website split into lots of HTML pages, and I also have one big HTML document with all the stuff combined that I then pipe, and that's sort of the catch. I also want to have a PDF, or actually sort of two PDFs. The design is very ugly because it's not really designed yet. But I want to have sort of like a printable version of my manual, with a hand-designed cover, and the rest being sort of auto-generated. And this is for, this is basically a spread. And then I also want a screen version, which is just, kind of like a slide show. For that right now, I'm using a commercial package called Prints.xml, which is basically HTML and CSS to PDF, a formatter that accepts HTML and CSS as input. Because this is the thing that I can control. I understand CSS, and the formatter is quite decent. It's not open source, so I cannot extend it. And I would like to
use context.
Well, I would like to switch to a text-based solution, but I'm not sure how. What would be the best sort of thing to use as the starting point or as the input format, because I don't necessarily want to, well, I have the Markdown sources, but they're sort of a bit, they use these custom plugins that I've written, so basically I don't want to replicate this in a completely different language that have, two implementations, even of this KBD, of this keyboard expansion thing. So at some point I can capture the HTML and then use different toolset to do something from it. Or I've also experimented with Pandoc, which is then written in Haskell, and I even wrote some, I've written some plugins for that as well, because I wanted to convert Word into Markdown, and it all worked great with the Pandoc as it is, except the images. So I wrote this little plugin that converts WMF into SVG as well, while it does the conversion. It was a weird thing, but so now I can get my old Word documents and have a Markdown collection with these images as SVG or PNG, rather than these WMFs that Word uses natively. So Pandoc might be an idea as well, but to go from my HTML or maybe Markdowns to like LaTeX and then run tech. But Pandoc is a bit lossy. Its internal object model, this abstract syntax tree, is not. It loses lots of stuff on the way when it goes through the conversion. So it's nice for kind of quick and dirty conversions, but it's not really something that I would want to rely on when I really want to influence my content. So right now I'm using Prints.xml. So my question basically to you would be, well, how would I do it, having first my markdowns or my HTMLs, and how would I use the tech machinery to, without investing like tons of time and writing new whatever, to get printable or PDFs basically that are static and.
Just today, Widnawodny gave us a solution. Use his markdown.
If you're satisfied with what you have, why would you do static? If this does the job for you?
It does the job, but it has its limits, because at some point, you know,
you need to design.
Yes, and this formatter is decent, but but you know, it is supposed to be in the end a manual for an application that is for type designers. So I want to at some point be able to tweak typography. I want to use maybe you know, variable fonts when they're there. And I don't think, I actually asked the print developers, and they say, oh, you font people keep inventing new things in your format all the time. So yes, we'll be trying to catch up, but it won't be immediate.
Yeah, but do you really think that the text solution would, you know, having hit the button and then manual will never work in this kind of document? You always will have to tweak also text. Text is not, it's automatic. It does good paragraphs, other things, but you always need.
And you'll be hard to collaborate with others.
I don't want to, you know.
No. So basically, this is, you know, this was my kind of like an open. I'm happy, sort of happy with, you know, I'll go with what I have now. But this is, I'm more like thinking, okay, after we release, finish it, and then there would be some time to maybe beautify the PDF.
Yeah, but it will not be hit the button and get a menu.
Did you look at Calibre? Did you look at Calibre?
Oh right. Yes. It's also, I think that, well, it's using some. I'm not sure what it's using to do the PDF version, but it possibly.
LaTeX.
Oh, okay. It does LaTeX, and it does.
It listens to the CSS.
Right. I see. Okay, that is interesting. I'll have and I think it is sort of written in Python to some extent, I think.
But it will be hard for you to control the output in PDF through here. It will be very hard. So I think for collaboration, this is the best solution, and then at the end, you do something to style it out.
So if you have a manual that you do every few years, then it pays off to spend a lot of time in making it beautiful. If you want to have it constantly updated, you always run into, oh, oops, page break on a page that I don't want, you have to move stuff around, you have to go in, how do you do that in your source? For instance, we do a lot of typesetting educational documents, and the input source is XML, which is very flexible. But there you can also add all kinds of processing instruction and other stuff to have, you know, to separate workflows served. And even if publish it and we sell it as its automated typesetting, in the end, because you are talking about a product that designers and whoever look at and say, no, actually you want this graphic next to that one because, you know,
right.
You always end up with manual intervention. And in that sense, you know, I'd like to advertise text, that's not a problem, but it's fully automatic, high-end typesetting doesn't exist. It's a lie if somebody sells it. But it's not a problem if you have a sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I have.
Occasionally, I have a moment that I can sit down for a week.
Well, so actually, because the one thing that I noticed about the process, and that's sort of the interesting aspect of it, is that I think it's very valuable in these types of scenarios to be able to basically capture intermediate steps of this processing, and because that's. You know, I kind of like this workflow that I could actually, the Pandoc thing was quite nice in a sense that I can go from Word to the JSON variant of this abstract syntax tree, then from it to Markdown, and then from Markdown either using Pandoc again or not, to HTML, or could use my Python implementation to go to HTML, and I have these steps where I can, where I can intervene, sometimes intervene with software written in a completely different language. So basically, you know, this thing, I mean, the prints is a C++, then there's some Python, there's some Python, but could be something else. There's this Haskell thing, which is and there may be some JavaScript included, and this is, I think, the sort of the thing that I don't necessarily like about the print solution is that it's sort of very black box in the end. So I just feed in, and I know that with tech I could probably sort of have some control in the middle.
Yes, but what you then should make part of your current flow is selective. That you say, okay, I edit a piece of text. This is meant for the web, and if I want to do this very nicely typed or whatever, I have an alternative section, or I add additional directives. That should be part of the flow, and that travels along because you have one source. That's it. It travels with the thing, and when you do an update of the manual, you tweak that bit a bit. Maybe a different image, or if I have the same thing. If I see your presentations, there was a discussion at the table a few days ago. Oh, we can do everything with text and flow. Forget about it. The way you do your presentations, I would never do with text. I can do it if I spend weeks, but that's not something you ask or use. And so that's a bit of trade-off. You can make beautiful documents. A good example is every few years I do the big MetaFun, the MetaPost menu, lots of samples, lots of graphics. I honestly don't know other tool that can process it manual in 15 seconds with 2,700 MetaPost graphics, lots of fonts, 500 pages. There's no other tool that can do it for me. But I also know that I have to sit down for a few weeks to do it. So you collect your stuff, you put extra, and then at some point you sit down and you have to do it. Tech is not doing that for you. And then it can run automatically, no problem. But you need to still invest time.
Okay, that's pretty much, I mean, for me, this is pretty much it. This is the gist of, you know, this is how I work, and I had these couple of questions and wanted to share this insight that basically, I think what could be shared from my perspective to the users of tech is that these types of scenarios basically need solutions, and you know, this question of what should be my source if I want this multi-channel to some extent, and maybe collaborative, you know, how do I deal with it, whether tech has a place in it, even maybe not necessarily in a super high end, but, you know, this prints, I mean, I bought, it's like, you know, for running on an individual computer, I think it's about $400, and the server-based solution, which I'm not using because I'm still building it on my manual is not sort of so frequently edited and changeable that I have to run it on the server, but for the server it's like about, I think, $4,000 or $5,000. So there could be, you know, an alternative. Some people are still looking. I mean, I found this print solution quite alright. They're pretty much the only ones that do it decently, and they obviously have users, but there are probably some users who are kind of left out. So this is my, you know, my kind of, well, message.
Did you discuss it with Richard? Because it reminds me of Sphinx stuff for his manual.